Okay, so I'm going to get you started on setting up your bead loom, and this is using the wooden looms. We have two different kinds of looms. We have the metal looms and we have the wooden looms, and they're going to be a little bit different in how they're set up. As you're getting there and getting going, you want to make sure you have your loom, duh, but you also want to make sure that you have your spool of Nymo D thread. That was this little tan spool that has a lot of thread on it. You'll need to make sure you have a scissor, and it's best if you have your pattern and some beads available, but if we're just getting started on setting it up, as long as you know how many warp threads you need, your thread, your scissor, and your loom, you'll be good to go. So to start off with, you'll notice that each end has a couple of screws, and these are going to be what you anchor your thread on. And you'll notice that there's 2 screws on each end. This is just to make it easier if you wanted to make a super wide piece, but admittedly I didn't give you guys necessarily the option of it, in part because our materials are limited. So we also have these threaded screws on each end, and these are going to be what space out your warp threads to make it so that you can fit the beads in between. To actually get started, you'll pull off a length of thread and start with a little half knot. So it's just wrapped around in a circle, and you're going to wrap that around one of your anchor points, and then you're going to complete that knot with a little overhand knot. Again, just wrapping it around, pulling that tail through, pulling it nice and tight. This is going to give you a really nice and strong anchor point, just so that when you're weaving it back and forth, it's going to have a place where it can really hook back to. So with this kind of loom, we don't have the flexibility of being able to adjust our tension later, so you really need to make sure that your tension is good from the start. This anchoring point is particularly important for that. So to start with, you're going to plan how many warp threads you need. So for this one, I'm using a pattern that has 11 warp threads. I made 2 different patterns, and I'm using each one for each loom. So on this one, my pattern has 11 warp threads because there's 10 beads across. Again, remember, you need 1 extra warp thread for how many beads you're going to be using. So because my pattern's a little bit wider for how many threads I need, I'm going to pull my thread across to a little bit later spot on here, and I'm just trying to get it mostly straight across. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm going to wrap it up underneath the opposing anchor point. And because we're using... Pause on the next screen. Pause here to take a look at how the threads should be spaced. I planned wrong, so you'll need to add a little bit of space between each warp thread. At this point, you should go every other thread on the screw instead of right next to each other. So when you see in the following video that I put them immediately next to each other, just know that I had to go back and restring it so that the warp threads had more space between them. Nice thin little seed beads. We don't really have to worry about giving extra space between them. I'm just going to thread directly into the next thread from where I first started, as far as on the screw here. So here's 2, making sure I'm keeping them evenly spaced. Here's number 3. This thread is super, super fine and kind of hard to see on the video, and also hard for me to see with my old people eyes. They're not actually that old. So if you also struggle with it, just take your time. Go nice and slow. Here's number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Oh no, and let it go. If you do that as well, just pop it back into place and keep on. 6. 7. Working on number 9. This is going to be number 10. And number 11. So I'm going to bring this around so I can actually see it. Turns out I didn't actually need to go over quite so far in my planning, but that's okay. I'm going to keep holding it tight, and I'm going to cut off an extra tail of thread. I'm going to give myself about 6 inches here using my scissor. And just like on the first side, you're going to make a little circly loop. Put that tail back through. Now you'll notice that my tension is getting kind of slack on this last one, but I'll be able to pull that tight as long as I'm making sure that I'm keeping it in the right spot. And then again, one more little loop, finishing the knot, holding it nice and tight to the screw. If it turns out that you didn't quite do it right, you can do a second pass around the screw, because again, we want these anchor points to be strong. Hopefully you can see that now I have my 11 warp threads so that I can weave my beads as I go through with my pattern.